Hello, my name is Joanne Sargent, and welcome to Choose Health. Today's program will be very interesting because there has been a lot of discussion over this past year about vaping. The medical professionals are concerned about it, teachers, parents are concerned about it. So today I have a very special guest, Carla Olson, who's a health educator. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you, Joanne.
And she's going to give us a lot of information about what we need to know. So Carla, help me understand what is vaping.
Okay, so vaping is the use of an electronic cigarette, often called an e-cigarette, which has a heating element, a place for liquid, which usually contains nicotine, and a coil. And people use it to inhale aerosol, which is primarily nicotine, and it's related to cigarettes. So it's almost like combustible cigarettes, but it's in a new form now.
So as someone who's never smoked myself, what is the population out there that seems to be really interested in vaping?
So usually the folks under 30 are the most often using vape products. So sometimes vaping is called vaping, juuling, or sometimes people call it e-cigarettes. So vaping came on the scene maybe about 10 years ago, originally as a way to help people quit combustible cigarettes. So that's a traditional smoking cigarette in a pack, 20 in a pack, that we're more familiar with. And then the last maybe 4 or 5 years or so, more youth have started to use e-cigarette products, vaping, juuling, and the numbers are actually becoming quite alarming. So at this point, about 4 million high school and middle schoolers are reporting, self-reporting, that they're vaping regularly. And in 2018, the numbers in this region, in the suburbs here, Metro West suburbs, the average is about 8% in middle school and 28% in high school of kids self-reporting that they had used an e-cigarette product in the last 30 days. Now, data is showing that those numbers for high schoolers are closer to 40%. So I look at nicotine and nicotine addiction as a pediatric disease because most people, even if they smoke traditional cigarettes or if they're vaping or juuling, they started in youth. 90% of the people who smoke as adults, whatever form they're smoking, started when they were in middle school or high school.
Amazing. And you use an interesting word, self-reporting, so it's fair to say that the numbers are probably higher because people are maybe uncomfortable with self-reporting.
That is entirely possible.
So do you think, for example, if you mentioned pediatrics, if a pediatrician is seeing a young person, do you think that that's part of a conversation that they're having with them at a medical office visit?
Yes, so that's our hope, is that people are having those conversations with their pediatricians, that when a pediatrician is seeing a young person for their annual physical, that they're bringing that up along with all the other health risk factors that kids are exposed to or experiencing.
Now you mentioned that as well, so health risk factors. What are the dangers of vaping?
So there are quite a few dangers from vaping. I'm going to focus mostly on youth. So as we know, the brain develops all of our lives, but the biggest time, the most important time when we're developing, our brains are developing, is up to age 25. So when a young person is introducing an addictive substance like nicotine into their system, that creates neural pathways that prime them to possibly develop other addictive behaviors down the road. It also makes it a lot harder for them to quit. So that's one of the concerns. Other things that shows that that have been demonstrated is that people develop increased experiences of anxiety, attention difficulties, and sleep disorders. So that's some of the physical manifestations. Also, considerations for oral health is we're just starting to realize some of those impacts. one of the problems is that since vaping has not really been around for that long, we don't know the long-term health impacts. Now, the CDC reports the numbers of people that have been hospitalized since we started realizing that people were being hospitalized for vaping-related illnesses, and we're almost up to 3,000 now in the United States of people being hospitalized. And in Massachusetts alone, 6 people have died. So, and about 60 people in the United States have died from vaping-related illnesses. Some of those people had vaped for years, and some of those people had been vaping for as little as 4 months. So it's really hard to know. And the folks that have been hospitalized, some of them were using traditional products that were being sold at legitimate vaping establishments. Some of them were making their own concoctions or buying what are called black market concoctions. And some of them were vaping THC, which is a marijuana product. But there's no consistent one factor that has contributed to the illnesses.
Interesting. Wow. So again, being somewhat naive in this industry, and also the fact that I don't have children, but I know that all of a sudden one day my husband and I were somewhere and he said, "Oh, look at that person's vaping." And I'm like, "Well, how do you know that?"
Right.
And you see these plumes of
Right.
smoke, and then so I've become educated in that regard.
Yeah.
So I have to assume that there is a secondhand smoke concern as well.
Yeah, so it's not smoke, it's vape, it's not vapor, it's
Okay.
aerosol. So it's like what you would have in hairspray or, a container of disinfectant, it's aerosol. And yes, that is also, the secondhand aerosol is also dangerous to bystanders as well.
Wow. So I know you brought some tools for us to look at today, and I think that certainly we'll have a conversation about parents and what to look for, but having you put these out on the table, I have to say that, it's kind of mind-boggling as to how, and correct me if I'm saying it correctly, in some ways they want to disguise this so that the average teacher or parent may not even recognize what these are.
Right. So I think my goal in being here is to really empower parents and other caregivers to have a conversation with people they love, whether they're youth or adults, and to discuss their concerns about vaping habits. So the first thing that we can do is educate people so they can have the confidence to bring forward a conversation. So I brought a few things here that people might see in say in their child's room, and they really look very similar to USB drives, a lot of them. So this is a Juul, very popular in the high schools. This is the pod that would contain the nicotine. And I also want to say that sometimes products are marketed with no nicotine, but when the testing is done, they do contain nicotine. And there also is very little regulation on these products so far. So this is a Juul. This would fit into your computer to charge it, and then you would buy individual pods to refill. And this is the mouthpiece here. This is a similar product. You would buy the pods. The pod would go here. This is a lanyard, so you make sure, keep it close. This is more like a traditional e-cigarette, and this is the liquid would go in here. It's heated up, and then this one is adjustable for the amount of product that you would want to take in at any one time. Also, this one is a good way to demonstrate one of the other concerns. There are a lot of microparticles that get into our lungs from vaping and using e-cigarette products. So there's things in the actual liquid, such as nicotine. Also, there's a lot of carcinogens, things that you find in antifreeze and in car exhaust, herbicides, weed killer. Again, largely unregulated. The other factor is that the product is coming in contact with this metal inside. So we're getting people who vape get the microparticles from tin, aluminum, etc., also in your lungs. Once something is in your lungs, you can't get it out. This is another product similar. You would fill this with your own liquid. This one, same thing. This is similar to the Juul, but also fill with your own liquid. And then there's other products that people use that are not e-cigarettes, but I thought they were important to bring to people's attention. So this is nicotine chewing gum, nicotine toothpicks, nicotine lozenges. So they look just like regular cough drops or something that you would get at the drugstore, CVS. These are pouches,
And
nicotine pouches.
what do they do with the pouches? Put them under their tongue?
Yep, you just put it in your
Okay.
mouth and it would dissolve. So it's a very discreet way of getting nicotine.
Right.
And then this is called a puff bar, and these are disposable. It's like a Juul, but this whole unit would be, you would not refill this, you would dispose of it once you were finished.
Right. And you mentioned it prior to the program, you and I were chatting. So, for example, one lozenger, what would that be equivalent to?
So Nick, these things come in different milligrams, but usually, like this would be a whole pack of cigarettes right here. So one lozenge would be a whole, one lozenge would be the equivalent of one whole traditional combustible cigarette.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah.
And again, you point out, so there's the vaping, and then there's the lozenges, the gum, the packets, which, as you pointed out a few minutes ago when we were talking about some of the health concerns, it opens up a whole other world of how our oral health care professionals,
Right.
our dentists, our hygienists, now start having to think about what kind of things these are causing to our children,
Right.
for the most part, because they're the ones that you say are mostly using this.
Right. And again, we don't know the long-term impacts of any of these items because they've really been only on the scene the last 4 or 5 years, accelerating in use in the last 2 or 3.
Right. And, you know, it's interesting. I have friends that are teachers, and it's really created a whole set of new concerns and new, I don't know if the right word is regulations, but that they have to do when they're in their schools.
Right.
And one teacher was saying to me, Joanne, we've even had to remove the doors off of the bathrooms. I'm thinking,
Right.
you're kidding me, because they're just trying to, you could say, monitor,
Right.
because they know how bad it is for the kids, and the
Right.
kids don't seem to grasp it. And this is one way of them to try and offset it.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's a big management problem, and so all of these products are developed by Big Tobacco, and they have a long history of success and opportunism, and so the Big Tobacco is ahead of all of us. I think the kids are ahead of the grown-ups, and we're trying to catch up now to educate ourselves and then help kids understand the risks that they're taking, because I don't think they understand what they might be getting themselves into as far as setting themselves up for a long-term lifetime in addiction, and also what the chemicals are and what they can do. A lot of kids still think it's just water vapor, so it's just flavored, you know, candy, cotton candy, you know, just water. And again, even when a product says it has no nicotine, most of the products, when they are tested, have nicotine in them.
Because when you showed me one of them and you said, smell this, I mean, it smells lovely, you know, and
right.
you can see how it could entice them into thinking, well, this just smells like cotton
Yes.
candy. This
Right.
can't possibly be hurting me in any
Right.
way.
Right. One of the other concerns is that, you know, we were saying earlier, like when you have a pack of cigarettes, you have sort of, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you take out your pack, you see how many you have left, you have sort of some understanding of how much you're ingesting. It's much harder with an e-cigarette or a vape because it's just in that little pod and it's just so accessible. There's no taking it out or lighting it or having to go outside. There's not the, your clothes don't smell badly. The smell sort of goes away with vaping. And you don't have the, with smoking, you know, you're dissuaded from smoking because your throat starts to hurt or you start to cough. And most of that stuff doesn't happen with vaping, at least in the beginning.
So it almost encourages them to continue to, do it.
You get on a track that you sort of don't realize how much nicotine and other products you're taking in.
Right. And I think what I've seen over the last several months that's probably effective education is with the young people who themselves have become ill from doing this,
right,
and maybe near death, and then they're the ones that are now talking about it. So when a young person sees another young person who's experienced it, hopefully it gives them pause to say, maybe I should, you know, rethink this, because it's certainly not glamorous by any means.
I think as a youth, I would be pretty outraged that the tobacco companies were going after me and my friends to get us addicted. We got the rates down to about 3% of kids were smoking, and now I just said we're up to maybe 40% of the high school students vaping. So they've built a whole new customer base in a very manipulative and opportunistic way. So I think the more that students see that they've been targeted, that's going to help also hopefully steer them away from that.
Right. You know, so we talked a little bit about the challenges that the teachers are having, you know, certainly a new set of concerns that the health professionals are having, and now, of course, the parents. I mean, how does a parent even begin to either assess whether their child is vaping, and then once they identify, how does that conversation happen?
Well, I think it's part of the broader conversation that everyone has with their kids as they're growing up, and teaching them about all kinds of dangers and how to cross the street and how to take care of themselves. And so I think it's a slow and steady conversation. Hey, I saw something on cable about vaping, and I was wondering, do you see other kids vaping in school? What do you think about that? Have you heard about any of the dangers? Have your health teachers talked to you about this? Opening up the dialogue, and then also the parents saying, we are opposed to vaping and we are worried about your health. We hope that you won't try it. And the other thing is to also, I think, help our kids come up with an approach when they are offered by their peers. We know peer pressure is a real thing and very irresistible, but if having the conversation, a dialogue with a parent or a trusted caregiver about how someone can respond when they are offered a vape or being pressured to vape, if that were to happen, what is something you could say, that's not for me, or I'm in sports training and I don't do that. Whatever the appropriate response is, to push back and give the child a confidence of something to say, practice it out. That is another way to help your kids defend themselves from getting involved in something that they don't want to be involved in.
Right, but you said that key word, peer pressure. And again, I never smoked, but I was around it, and I had a lot of people back in the day that would offer me a cigarette, and I just never was interested. And I think nowadays it's even harder. There's a lot more peer pressure. But I think, if I could tell my younger self, and I was proud of the fact that I was able to say no, but I think kids nowadays are afraid of the peer pressure and what that's going to do to them on so many different levels. And I think if they can be steadfast and have really the strength to say no, and if someone says, well, then I'm not going to hang out with you anymore, then fine. They're not your friend if this is the direction that they are forcing you to think through.
Yeah, I mean, as parents, teachers, and caregivers, that's one of our jobs, is to help our kids be resilient. So this is just part of that conversation.
Right, and you're a parent, so I'm sure you've had the conversation with your own children.
More than they want to hear.
Yes, exactly, now that you've become an expert in this field. So let's just say that, I am a parent and, my child comes to me, or we come to an understanding that they want to quit? You know, what does that look like?
So first I would go to the pediatrician, right? Go to the child's pediatrician and have that conversation with the pediatrician, and they will come up with a protocol. There are lots of texting and in-person phone supports also that I know we're going to link some web pages at the end that people can peruse and try to find something. It's not one size fits all. I would start with the pediatrician. If that didn't come forward with any results, maybe a community health nurse would be the next step.
Okay. And do you find that more and more pediatrician offices are certainly in tune to this and have the availability to have the conversations with the kids?
I think so. And resources to addiction specialists. It is an addiction, and it will take effort for many of these kids to quit.
Right, exactly. Because I can imagine too, I know for smoking, you know, there's things like Nicorette gum. Similar tools, would you say, or are they different?
It's really up to the pediatrician.
Okay.
So those things are not regulated or not approved for youth, but some physicians do use them.
Okay. So again, parents have a tough job, you know,
always, yes.
Because I'm sure as a parent sometimes you might say, well, my child wouldn't do that. So again, maybe kind of a tough question to ask, but you know, if you're a parent and you assume your child isn't doing it, is there any value to, aside, you know, if you sit down with them and you understand the dangers of it, is there any value to sitting down with them, having the conversation, they say, no, mom, dad, I'm not vaping, then do you take it one step further, or do you trust that that answer is accurate, or do you go in their room? What do you do if you really want to be
I think
sure?
that's an individual decision. Each family has to make their own decision. I kind of go with, you know, I trust you until you've given me a reason not to. So if you are suspicious and if you're concerned and your child's exhibiting a cough or unusual behavior, or there's, you know, somehow the money that you think they have is starting to evaporate. You know, if you're seeing signs that something's happening, I absolutely would recommend that somebody look into it further in whatever way it fits their values.
Right. And as a health educator and or a teacher in a school, if you have reason to believe or you see a child vaping, where is the responsibility? Is it just between the teacher and the child, or does the teacher have to?
No, that would be an administrative.
So they could potentially have a teacher-parent meeting and share with them what they've seen or
because
some of their concerns.
Smoking and e-cigarettes are illegal for anyone under 21. So having that paraphernalia or using it at a school would be a violation.
Okay, so anyone over 21 can legally purchase these items.
Yes, the rules are changing. You know, statewide, Massachusetts has one of the most restrictive rules, and then nationally we're changing the rules also. But yes, over 21 it's legal.
Right. So there again, if the parent or the, you know, the 21-year-old plus could buy it and potentially give it to a child, and that's where we get the biggest problem. Yeah.
For sure.
There is so much information on vaping, and I know that it has a lot of health concerns for so many people, for parents, educators, the health professionals. This has been very informative. I know for me, I've been somewhat naive. I couldn't tell you that I would know what any of these things look like, so you've opened my eyes for sure to all of this, and I think that the links that you've provided on this program will help parents, teachers, anyone who might just want to do more research, more information to help them deal with this very difficult, dangerous situation. So thank you for being on the program. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.